Hi, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to BGS webinar on cybersecurity risk and opportunities. I'm Roshni Bandesha, the head of ESG Sustainability. And today we are joined by Edwin Bartlett and Rob Domain, who are experts within this field. I think today's topic is particularly interesting because if you look at the statistics, just over last year, 4 in 10 UK businesses actually reported having some form of cybersecurity breach and attack. And if you look at the small to medium enterprises, which forms majority of the numbers even higher. So there were about 65% who reported having some form of cybersecurity threat. So while we recognize that cybersecurity is a threat, it's also important to note that the conversation has moved on. That from a threat, cybersecurity is also an opportunity now. It's something that your customers are demanding. It's something that businesses are required to also do from a regulatory perspective. That's why we got our experts today to share with us that you, as the CEO, as the board members, where do you actually start from? And how do you start thinking about this particular complex issue for your business? Just before we kick off, I do want to say that we have a Q&A session available, a section, that you can send your questions in, and I'll make sure that I do ask both of our experts to comment about your questions. So without further awaiting, maybe I can hand over to you, Rob, to give an introduction.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rob Domain. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called E3 Assure. We joined the BGF portfolio back in March. So we specialize in something called detect and respond. So we connect to your systems, your IT, and detect and respond to cyber attacks 24/7. That's the key function of our business. And we operate globally in doing that. The key goal of our business is to reduce your exposure to cyber risk, but also to prepare you for an attack should it happen so that you can respond to it with us doing the work for you and minimize the impact of anything that might happen.
Thank you, Rob. Ed, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ed Bartlett. I'm CEO and founder of a business called High Comply. We joined the BGF portfolio in the summer of last year. And High Comply is a software as a service, B2B application that helps organizations set up an information security management system and ultimately allow those businesses to attain the relevant information security certifications needed to trade in the current economies. Really, our vision is a world where no business, whatever size, is prevented from accessing geographies or markets on the basis of a lack of trust. So we're all about building trust between the provider of technology and services with buyers of those technologies and services. Thank you, Roshni.
Thank you both. And it's particularly exciting always to talk to CEOs from our portfolio companies about these issues. So let's maybe kick off and let's set the scene for the people who are attending. So cybersecurity, it's generally talked about from a threat perspective, as I said. However, I'd love to hear from both of you that what is the actual potential of this for an SME? Do you see this as an opportunity as well? So Ed, maybe starting with you to get your comments on this.
Thank you, Roshni. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think the dynamics are changing weekly. And I think for most SME business leaders and probably most business leaders full stop, the mere mention of the word cybersecurity causes sort of a run for the hills response or a cold sweat. The media portrays this whole area as dark, murky, frequented by guys in hoodies looking to steal your assets. And I think it's the marketing and the media side of things has really pushed that agenda, and it's helped to create that fear.
Yeah.
But in my view, the benefits really do outweigh the risks, and I think the principal opportunity, and I'm sure we'll talk about more later, really for us and what we see with our customers is what I call sales enablement. And really, it's something I'm sure that will appeal to every investor-backed business on this call who's got challenging sales targets to hit in their business plan. Really what we're seeing is the opportunity is about differentiation and access to markets and access to customers that maybe they wouldn't normally have. Best example of that is my former business, KaiCloud. I mean, before we hired our 5th team member, we invested in cybersecurity credentials. We went for ISO certification. And as a result, our second customer was the UK Department for Education. We won a contract that was worth many millions of pounds, still running today, even though I've exited the business, it's still happening and still generating revenue. And taking cyber seriously, we qualified for the government G-Cloud framework, we won that tender, and off the back of that, we won many other government contracts with the NHS, Foreign Commonwealth Office, the MOD. It was transformational for the business, and I think it was really the catalyst for what we're doing today with High Comply. But yeah, to me, it's an opportunity. Thank
you. Rob, do you think about it similarly?
Absolutely. I think the key thing I want to start with, though, is understanding the threat. There's a lot of what we call FUD, and that's what Edwin was just talking about, is the negative marketing of people selling you cybersecurity, trying to create a lot of fear. And it's key that organizations understand the threats. I mean, the key threats to most organizations who are SMEs is things like ransomware and business email compromise. Yep. So I guess it's important to understand these threats and the impact they could have. So imagine that someone had access to your whole email of your whole business for a number of months and was forwarding things and copying things. That's business email compromise. And they could be forwarding payments, but they could be simply stealing all your data or looking at all your emails and conversations within the business. So that's what a business email compromise threat looks like. And they may then use that to extort you in some way because they've stolen some data. And ransomware is very similar in the objective. It's to get money off you effectively these days. It's not about destroying your data typically. It's about stealing it and then saying, pay me to get it back. And that could be IPR. It could be financial data. It could be anything that would hurt you most, they'll find. So that's the threat, but I'm not trying to make you feel scared. I just want you to understand what the threats are really. There's other ones that we'll talk about later, but fundamentally, most businesses should be aware of those type of threats and then think about the impact that could have on them. So would that be devastating to your reputation? Would you be in legal problems? Would you have commitments to your customers which you'd failed upon? What is the impact? So have an understanding of that to begin with. But these problems aren't terribly difficult to deal with. So don't sort of treat them as things that could just happen to you at random and you can do nothing about them. That's not the right way of addressing it. So if you think about think about a long-term strategy, putting things in place now that turn it into a key strength of your business. But the first step, I guess, is making sure you're not an easy target because that's how this works. And then building on a strategy which uses it as Edwin says, a key business enabler, a key strength, a key contract winner.
Got it, understood, Rob. So that's really interesting. And maybe staying with you for a second. So it seems that cybersecurity threats are quite common across different types of businesses. But in your experience, have you seen that certain businesses or certain sectors or profile or another characteristics makes a business more susceptible?
Sure. So there used to be a lot more of that taking place before it was so criminalized. So back in the day, this used to be a lot of hacktivists and activists and all those type of organizations and enthusiasts and people in the bedroom. But these days, this is fully outsourced criminal activity. They're after money, simple as that. And it's a criminalization of this. It's the fact that people are making fortunes out of this. And the ransomware groups operate as very, very effective businesses. That means that everyone's a target who is making money, simple as that. So they'll target, you look at your company's house data, and if you're making money, you're a target. If you've got your cyber defenses aren't strong, you're an easy target. They're just going to spray and pray all these targets. Generally, it's mass volume attacking constantly, looking for someone to make a mistake, and then they work out what the opportunity is. But also there's the good, well-formed criminal gangs that go for people with profits. So there's an algorithm that's quite easy. If they make 10 million profit, they might pay $1 million ransom. Oh. So, there's as you make more money, you're more attractive to criminals, clearly, just as you are in any other way in life.
So irrespective of which sector you're in, there's
high threat sectors, so there's other sectors that can be impacted by larger threats. But I guess for most organizations, I guess the point where you need to start is just accept that criminals are targeting you, trying to steal your assets, and they're digital assets, just like they are physical assets. There are other threats that we can talk about, but that's probably more complex for a deeper conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
And really, the simple message is that it's anyone who's susceptible to making money is the best target, and who has not very good cyber is even better.
I think the worry about these threats is that you also don't understand where it's coming from. Necessarily, it seems like this black box, and that's where the threats are being channeled from. So maybe I'd hearing from you, where do you think these threats are coming from? Is this your competition? Is this your customer? Are they just hackers who are going for it? How can a business sort of start thinking about the potential areas from where the threats are coming, or the groups?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, there are a number of different sort of actors at play, is sort of the terms often used. And I'd say, as Rob's already mentioned, I think, and stressed, is, without doubt, the top threat for an SME, or I'd say any business going forward, is ransomware. And incidents are up 300% in 2021 based on latest research, and typically it's small businesses. You look at the total number of ransomware attacks, it's 71% of those are small businesses. But sort of think about how do they get into the organization? What's the route in? I think really what you're pushing at, and I think it's we've seen many examples. I mean, there's a well-known example of an email marketing business. They received an email: "We've taken over your server, we've locked your documents, pay us 15,000 in cryptocurrency, and you can have your documents back." The CEO actually managed to negotiate down to 5,000 euros to get his information back. But then the cost of that event, if you like, was probably 10 times that 5,000 paid. So it's the downtime, it's the other impacts, and I think thinking about the routes in it's important to sort of think hard about this. But I think what we've seen is it's really there's two routes in. There's, as Rose mentioned, there's someone clicking on a link or phishing email, and it's giving somebody access through, or maybe security holes in a system that haven't been shored up or haven't been patched over. So there's two principal routes in. But really, when you think about those two routes, it's really it's the hacker that's knocking at the door, but it's often someone in your team that opens the door. It's always a combination of a threat actor and someone in your organization, maybe not being fully aware and trained on how to handle these sorts of things. Maybe your IT team hasn't been given the resources to ensure that systems are patched and kept up to date. So really, focusing on staff awareness and getting policies and procedures and training in place will, for 90% of the situations, probably prevent that the incident happens. So really, I'd say that, as Rob's pointed out, the actors are going to be out there forever, right? And only going to. So the focus has to be on your people and your organization, and making sure that your team understands that they're ultimately going to be opening that door. So it's really to us, we very much focus on the people side, because we're never going to be able to stop what's happening in the industry as a whole. So I'd say it's more about the team and understanding how to prevent those issues happening in the first place.
Rob, anything you'd like to add to where these threats are coming from?
No, I'd like to sort of just articulate. So we've been doing this over 8 years. We're on our 9th year now, and we've been covering organisations of all sizes, including major government organisations, critical national infrastructure, which is really high threat areas, all the way down to SMEs. And I guess it's a mixed bag of where the threats are coming from, whether you call it an insider or an excider or criminal. The impacts are all the same. But I think if I focus on some of the bigger enterprise sort of hacks that have been in the news the last couple of years, I mean, Kasey was a good example, which was 70 million in Bitcoin was the ransom they paid. So It's quite a large one. That's in dollars. And it goes all the way to JBS, the food supplier, that's $11 million of just paying the ransom. All the way to Travelex, I think that was around $6 million. But if you look at Travelex and what actually happened, that was one of the deepest impacts of the failure of Travelex, or all those organisations who really struggled with those things. So, there's lots of stuff out there around this ransomware payment piece, but that's generally not the real problem that organisations have. It's the cleanup, it's the disruption of what they were doing. So you have hacks that might come into critical supply chains that disrupt that supply chains. And because the company had that problem, they couldn't supply a part to Tesla or something. So the real impacts are much more not really the headline numbers that you read that are all debated in what the Bitcoin value was. It's the disruption to the business and the restore costs, because you don't just pay the ransom and it decrypts and everything's fine. You've got to probably rebuild most of your IT. to really make sure that you've got yourself back where you need to be. Even if you pay the ransom, it's not the end of the story, if you like, and generally you shouldn't pay the ransom. So it's what happens around the actual headline, if you like, that's actually the thing that costs the most damage. So I think that's the key thing to understand and think about what would happen. If your critical event is Black Friday and something happens in the run to Black Friday, that could have a very big impact to your business. Yep. Beyond some ransomware for 15 grand or something.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think it's quite scary to be that insider who inadvertently clicks on something or is the one who opens the door to creating such a large issue for businesses. No, thank you. That was very interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that. Now, Ed, one of the things that obviously in your experience is providing this product for cybersecurity, but is the reality today that companies are still very reactive when it comes to thinking about cybersecurity? Something has already happened, a problem has arisen. That's why we're looking at it. Where would you put the market behavior or company behavior as of today?
I think today, I'd say it's moved to more of a preventative model. I think, but that shift has only, from what we've seen, been quite recent. I think up until very, over the last, I think there's been a massive market transformation. I think, what we've seen with businesses being disrupted, people working from home, there has been a sort of a moment of navel gazing. People have been thinking, well, what, we need to get back on our feet. We need to be more resilient going forward. This sort of build back better type concept. And I think part of that agenda is definitely focusing on cyber. And I think it's, for what we've seen, it's almost got itself attached to what, if you think of, your space, Roshni, in terms of the ESG side of things, that saw a real, I guess, renaissance in, maybe 3-4 years ago. And it's almost embedded now into every corporate sort of, annual report. But it's part of their culture now. I think most organizations are taking it seriously. And I think cyber's in that sort of, it's where ESG was maybe 5 years ago. And I think what, this recent sort of refocus on businesses and how to get back on their feet has changed that approach. And I think also, another dynamic here is that, a lot of government agencies and customers have been starting to mandate a lot of this into their requirements and tenders and that sort of thing. So, it's become more widespread because, ultimately it's been driven by the big corporations pushing it down their supply chain. And I'm sure that's something we'll get into in a bit. But I think it's historically been very reactive. But I think as well, looking at the sort of reactive side of it, I think it's not always the reaction to a threat. I think it's, or an incident. And I think as Rob's mentioned, those threats and incidents, are they ever present, omnipresent. So really, I think what we're seeing is that reaction and planning and looking at the opportunities that we've talked about. And I think, addressing the customer needs. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to see definitely over the next 12 months an increasing sort of flip into more planning and forward planning. And this is something that I don't know how many organisations on the call today have taken out cyber insurance, for example. Yeah. Cyber insurance is ultimately what most organisations are seeing as a way of handling a preventative measure, if you like, to handle some of the threats that we've talked about. So, there's definitely new products, there's new an understanding of the dynamics of the market, but so certainly the insurance industry has jumped on it. It's got issues, which I'm sure Rob might comment on, but there's definitely something that we're seeing that transformation. But I think ultimately it's the customers that are going to drive. Our customers are going to drive the agenda going forward. And I think for most businesses, they're going to be dragged, whether they want to do anything about cyber, they're going to be forced to do something about it. I think that's what we're seeing. Yeah,
I think you raise a really interesting point about the opportunity and starting from there, right? Like thinking about your long-term plan, and then also being quite aware that actually we're moving towards an opportunity space over here. And I'd like to delve into that a bit deeper. So maybe, Rob, if you could perhaps share with an SME CEO, if you had to, about what is the actual hidden opportunity that we're talking about, which can shift their mindset from a risk mitigator to actually creating value for the business, what would you share? Like, what kind of examples or themes come out from an opportunity perspective?
Well, so I think there's a real opportunity. I think if you start with the baseline concept of being better than the competition at cybersecurity makes you better than the competition. So It's almost an easy win straight away. And if that is a strength that you can acquire as well as what you're good at, that's an easy thing that builds your capability, isn't it? I think that's a key thing. And if you want to advance on that and differentiate yourself and stand out from the crowd in that respect, it's going to pay dividends in the long term. The biggest opportunity for SMEs is to start doing something now, because it gets a lot harder as you grow. Retrofitting good cybersecurity as you've grown rapidly is a very difficult thing. So the opportunity is to put some stuff in place now, create a long-term strategy, rather like ESG, and that will then put your business in a good stead. First, it'll reduce the risk of something bad happening, which you don't want in that growth cycle. But also, you'll realise it is a key strength. And when you're talking to customers, it's one of the things that you bring up in that presentation, that you put in the tender, and you're confident in describing. And that kind of reassurance is a kind of a good citizen thing as well. So your employees like it if you're good at this, because you're also protecting their data.
Yes.
Because if you get hacked, it's their data that gets stolen. It's their emails. So you have you being a good citizen to your employees is all part of this. Taking it seriously, protecting them, and protecting your customers starts to raise your profile in the supply chain, doesn't it? You're seen as someone who's doing something much better than the competition, and that is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And I think the best companies of the next few years will be the ones that are the best at this, that get it. And it doesn't mean that you need to. We talked about this earlier, Ed, didn't we? People see this as a big cost center, a big drain on money, spending money on cyber, don't really see the benefits, don't see the outcomes. And it's about changing that mindset and understanding you can start to use this as very positive spend to drive innovation, to drive you into spaces where you didn't think you could go, because you've got good cybersecurity that's enabling you to do something, opening a factory, opening a new office, doing something in the cloud. Whatever it is, start to see it as an enabler, and then sort of advertise and market the fact that you've got these key things that give you business advantage. And that's the heart of the hidden opportunity, I'd say. Yeah,
but and also for investors, right? Like as these things come up, investors are really looking into this, and they want to invest in businesses who are cyber secure and not having these threats come up.
A couple of things there, Roshni. The cyber insurance was talked about. So that's becoming very difficult to get hold of, and very complicated, sort of 200 questions and things like that. The market is struggling because insurance is quite difficult to understand. Why companies who spend a lot on cybersecurity still get big problems. And insurance doesn't like that. So you want to be insurable, so investing in cybersecurity can reduce your premium, but more as we move forward, you want to be insurable, have good cybersecurity policies, not ones that are worthless, but ones that work. That's important, isn't it, moving forwards? But also, cyber due diligence is a thing. As you grow, you look for more investment and look to do other things. You don't want a due diligence organization to bring in cyber due diligence people and say, actually, there's a massive risk that all this IPR doesn't exist anymore, or whatever it is you're doing. So don't let that happen. Don't leave that risk hidden and think it's ostrich approach, we call it, which is, I'll be fine. Get it on the board agenda and do something and turn it into a strength. So when someone asks you the question, you've got the answer, and they go, oh, that's impressive. Another reason to use you guys.
Agreed. Ed, any examples from you which we can potentially share with the CEOs that show this in an opportunity perspective? Yeah,
absolutely. I think the hidden opportunity, I think I mentioned the word earlier, which was trust. And I think, we're in a digital economy, trust is difficult to build. And I think one thing, the key opportunity here is around building trust. And I think the best example of that, we're working with, at any one time, we'll have, a significant number of organizations going through a certification process, with the aim of getting, the ISO 27001 certificate or whatever it might be. But what we really see is really the step before that the opportunity to build trust occurs. And I'm working with, there's probably 2 or 3 BGF portfolio companies that we're working with at the moment. And the conversation with each of those really started around supply chain, and it started around tender situations. And it's really, I could probably put out on the table, a tender set of questions from a major oil company, from a major retailer, from a government agency, and each one of them will be effectively asking the same questions in a slightly different way, but fundamentally that all these customers are asking for the same questions. And I think historically, my advice to a CEO of a business would be, they look at those questions and think, we can't answer those. We don't have X, we don't have Y, we don't understand encryption, we don't understand what access control, why is that relevant to us? We're a remote business, and there's a sort of almost a bit of a sort of like, we can't deal with this. Now, what the one piece of advice I would give is, what customers really want to see is they want to see an element of honesty. And the best possible thing you can do is to say, right, okay, as an organization, we've started the journey. As Rob said, to start that journey, demonstrate how you're on the road to, or you're on a journey towards improving your cyber posture and how you position yourselves, and just give examples of a policy, a cyber policy, and it might be a simple one like encryption or access control, and there's others that just around how you train your staff and how you onboard your staff. Build a policy, even if it's just 5 policies to start with, build those policies, make them work, and actually implement them, and show the customer that you do implement those policies, and show them evidence. And that's much more powerful for most customers than a sort of Google best case example of an answer. They what they really want to see is that you've embedded the policies, you've embedded the ways of working into your organization, and you can evidence that. And I think that's something we've seen as a real sort of differentiator with organizations we're working with. They're able to implement their policies and procedures in a matter of weeks, even days. Historically that would take an organization maybe 9 to 12 months to do. So it's something that you can do very quickly, and it's something that you can implement and push quickly. But yeah, I mean, every set of questions we see are effectively the same question. So you do this once and you do it well once, and then really you can reuse that time and time again. It's something that's collateral. It's something that you can really invest in. So I would, and my other piece of advice there, don't make it a technical job. It's not something you throw at the, if you're a small business, you throw at the director who looks after IT, or your IT director. It's a marketing, IT, procurement. It's a business-wide activity. Get everybody's input into that, and it's got to, it's that response, that security response, has got to look and read as well as your website. It's got to be punchy. It's got to give the information, give the evidence, give the case studies. Really sell the organization's approach. And I think that's something a lot of organizations don't do. They see the questionnaire as a very dry, okay, I'll fill it in, tick a few boxes, and send it back, and not appreciating that fundamentally that could be the decision-making criteria that decides whether you're going to win that contract or not.
No, thank you, Ed. We've also received a couple of questions, which I think ties really nicely with the next set that we're going to go into, wherein if the way that we've talked about it, we've seen that obviously there are certain businesses who will be at the beginning of the journey, and there are certain businesses who will already be the best in class in cybersecurity. So I do think it's important and valuable for our attendees to hear sort of if a business is just starting their journey, where do they actually start it from? How are they more cognizant of the size that they are at, and at the beginning of this problem that they're trying to solve, all the way to a business that's doing it really, really well. So, and the question that we received from our attendees is actually around accreditations, which come into these two areas. So we have one question, which is around the problem of that, there's a business that's looking at a cyber essential plus accreditation. Is this a good standard for them to aim for? And then taking it to the other side is like, at a broader level, what are some of the industry standards and best accreditations to be working towards if you are trying to demonstrate this? So maybe we could take people through a journey of, if you're starting, what would your journey look like, what accreditations there are, and if you're best in class, how does that whole piece move? Rob, starting with you, from the starting of the journey, where would you
position? Yeah, so I guess the first thing is, we call it, it's like accepting the risk. So accepting there is a risk, accepting there is something you need to do at a board level, creating it a board agenda item, having it in your board pack, or wherever it is, making sure that it's on your agenda and you want to do something about it. So without desire or will, there's not much point in moving forward. If you think you can avoid this problem, then it's, that's not the best place to start. And I think of it as a journey. Something that's incrementally fixed over time, and it's something you're going to fix as part of the strategy, or part of the plan. And then we always advise looking for a trusted advisor as opposed to thinking it's an IT problem. Okay, so what Ed's alluded to there as well is it's kind of like some organizations go, well, I'll just buy a firewall or some AV then, and that's the problem sorted. And that kind of misses the point about having a cyber strategy and a plan. And then it's all about creating a strategy and implementing it with someone who's a specialist in cybersecurity, not your IT team, or not the person who's got to do the IT, or your MSP, because there's a real easy way to get lulled into false senses of security here. So we generally advise, if you're starting, is to get some sort of assessment. If you don't want to pay for anything, then look at Cyber Essentials self-assessment to begin with. Okay. Download it from Cyber Essentials, NCSE site, IASME site. IASME run the program. We can send you some links. Have a look at Cyber Essentials, the self-certification. Look at the type of questions you've got. Speak to a company like Ed's, who have got sort of packages for ISO 20001 and things like that, try and understand what it means, what it is to be certified. So what you want to try and do is start a program that's got a relevant level of certifications and badges that you can hold, Cyber Essentials, PCI, whatever it is, and they'll be relevant to your industry, and someone can tell you what they might be. So if you're in any industry, you should have Cyber Essentials self-assessment. Okay. Yeah. If you're, the question was about the retail sector, yes, you should be doing Cyber Essentials Plus. So that actually tests attacks and things like that. So that is actually a technical test as well as a paper assessment and an interview. So that is quite more advanced certification. And Ed will probably tell you about some other ones as we progress. But basically, there's a certification thing you want to do, but there's also technical things you want to do as part of the strategy. And how we approach it is that we start with the strategy where you are now and assess that, and then we apply a service to that will hit a lot of the risk quickly, and then incrementally improve things over time. Our strategy is always for SMEs in particular, to say, right now you've got a really good opportunity to make some good IT changes, to create a good IT strategy that reduces your cyber risk at the same time. And often this is about realizing that for most organizations to be good at cybersecurity, simplicity is key. Yeah. So by making your IT simple, having less products, having more cloud services, you can be more efficient, but you can also have less cybersecurity challenges, if you like. So often it's about trying to get the business to understand how they can do good, sensible things that make cyber affordable and make sure they're not wasting money on things that aren't effective for an SME, if that makes sense.
Understood. So there is the need to sort of first start with commitment, then actually look at what options are out there, then top the key ones that are relevant for your industry, which seems like Cybersecurity Plus is quite a good one. Thank you, Rob. And then Ed, if we take this conversation forward towards a company that's best in class, what does that sort of look like? What characteristics are they showing?
Yeah, I think, the phrase that we see used by sort of the big enterprise customers is, what they describe as best in class is a business with good security posture. And it's an odd word to use in this or that, but it's really, the reason posture is used is because it's ever changing. And it's something that an organization, it's how they portray themselves and how they present themselves often. But it really refers to, the strength of the controls, the protocols that they've got in place for predicting cyber threats. So a best-in-class business has security controls in place, and they have protocols and procedures, and they're able to not predict and totally prevent events, but they're looking at those events as part of their risk assessment. So, a best-in-class business will have a business-wide risk assessment that they update every year as a minimum. And most organizations would update that on a monthly or even quarterly basis. And it's also, not just how they plan and the posture. It's how they demonstrate their ability to act and respond during and after. So as Rob mentioned, customers accept that these things might happen, and they accept that organizations will, even if they do everything, they might be best in class, they might have the best characteristics, but ultimately something might still happen. So they're, as Rob mentioned, it's what happens afterwards and how they respond and how they manage that is often more important than prevention in the first place. So I think it's how you, it's how you demonstrate your resilience plans, your disaster recovery, and so it's really everything from, the controls right the way through to disaster recovery and being able to demonstrate that you don't just have a meeting every month where you have an agenda where you discuss it and some people turn up and some people don't. And, it's actually part of your culture of the organization. And it's our board meetings, with BGF, we have information security as the first item on the agenda, partly because of the nature of the business we're in, but it's also, fundamental for us to, it's up there with HR and finance. It's not buried away at the back. So I think just a best-in-class organization, if you just pick up their ball pack, you'll be able to tell where they fit in this horizon. But coming back to the question about Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, I mean, we as an organization even though we're in this, we started with Cyber Essentials, we moved up to Cyber Essentials Plus, and then we got our own business ISO 27001 certified, and we're now looking at others. So as an organization in this space, I'd say, as Rob said, start on that journey. And the difference between Cyber Essentials Plus and Cyber Essentials is that there's active scanning and investigation of your systems. It's another level. And I would say that Cyber Essentials Plus has got more and more difficult to achieve. It's becoming more onerous. So I think, particularly if government agencies, I know, for example, in the education space, I picked up a document last week that said, in order to acquire access funding in education, this year, 2020, you need to have Cyber Essentials. 21, you need to migrate to Cyber Essentials Plus. 22 onwards, we need to see that you're moving towards ISO 27000. So it's not one size fits all. I think it's a journey. And I think there's always a good place to start, which I think is Cyber Essentials. But we would see by the time you've done your Cyber Essentials Plus, you're already on that journey to the next step. And I think it's that sort of, it's almost like a maturity matrix. You're moving up through that level of maturity. And if you're trading in sort of government MOD circles, you'll be expected to address other things like the MOD DEFSTAN 05138, which is a real thing. And if you're a US focused, e-commerce business, where privacy and personal data is a major issue, and you're trading in the US, you'll probably also need to get yourself certified for something called SOC 2, which is very different to a SOC. SOC 2 is a audit based certification that's maybe 80% the same as ISO 27001, but it's got some specific controls and elements to it that make it more specific to the US market in particular. So what you'll find is as you go into the different markets, there might be, you need your core set of certifications to trade, but then different markets will require, we're working on one, for example, at the moment called DSPT, which is a NHS specific one for the UK market. There's HIPAA, which is healthcare in the US. So there's probably 20 or 30 different certifications, but in the UK, I think the most natural progression is Cyber Essentials up to ISO 27001. And I think if you're focused on that sort of maturity growth, that's the best way to explain it. But definitely posture and evidence, right at the culture embedded in the culture of the business is what really makes best in class, rather than the certificate itself. The certificate is really the stamp of approval. Yes. That's what you're doing. But actually, you won't get the certificate if you've not embedded it in your business, because the auditors do find out. They ask the questions to really understand whether do you really take this seriously, or is it just a logo you want for your website? Because if that's what you're trying to achieve, then they will expose that without a doubt.
Yeah, I think that's where the thought also comes from, right? Like how do you show that you're actually doing something that makes you a competitive advantage versus just having a logo? Now, another piece that we also hear from the CEOs and the board members is they want to know what the issue is, but what is the right question to be asking and who should they be asking this question to? Like, which team is responsible for cybersecurity or being more cyber secure? So what I'd love to hear from you is your recommendation on top sort of 3 or 4 questions that our attendees can take away and point them in the direction of the teams or the individuals that or themselves that they should be asking these questions about. Rob, maybe I'll start with you on this one about the top 3, 4 questions.
I've got about a dozen, so I'll try and keep it short. So I guess the first question at board and CEO level is who is responsible for cybersecurity in your business?
Yeah.
Or who owns cyber risk? Do you know who that is? Who is owning the risk? Start with that. That's a really good question, because I think that's, if you can't answer that, that's the first thing, isn't it? Where is that? And then the next thing we like to talk about, okay, if you had a cyber incident, assume when, but not if. So National Cybersecurity Centre have been saying this for years. You should prepare for an incident, not pretend it's not going to happen. So then the next question is really, okay, so if you had a cyber incident, do you know what to do?
Yeah.
What would you do? How would you detect it? How would you respond to it? And how would you stop it becoming a major impact to your business? And then following on, who would you report it to? What are your obligations to your staff and your customers, or regulators, GDPR, the ICO? What is it that could happen? Do you understand if it's a criminal activity? Do you understand how to involve the police? Have you thought about that? What might happen? And then have you thought about the impacts it could have, and how big an impact they could be on your reputation, data loss, theft, confidentiality, all those things. So how it works really is it's risk, and you're looking at understanding that risk, who owns the risk, and then thinking about the impact that an attack could have, and trying to understand, could your organization minimize that? What are you going to do about it? And I think I'd also ask them, do you understand how well protected you are against ransomware? Do you answer that question? Could you do a table talk exercise where you had a ransomware attack, and could you be able to go through that and resolve that in some way? Same with email compromise. So I think there's various things that we'd ask, but I'll keep going. Yeah. Have you done a tabletop exercise that imagines you're having a cyber attack and who you would notify, what messages you'd put out to in your PR and things? Have you thought about this? And again, I'll probably leave it there, but I guess I could probably list quite a lot. But I'm trying to focus on the board and CEO level questions, and it starts with who owns cyber risk.
Yeah, interesting. Ed, any questions for you to ask, and who should be these channel to?
Yeah, it's an interesting, because I think there will be companies listening to this webinar who, maybe they're relatively small teams, and there isn't a sort of nominated IT director even. I think a lot of early stage technology business we work with, we're talking to the CEO, the CTO, head of product. It's very much it. I think this is where I think the key thing here is it's not about giving somebody the job and making somebody a person responsible to answer the questions. I think I'd sort of turn it back the other way, and I'd say what questions should the board be asking itself? Every company has a board meeting, and I think the questions should be asked of the board. And it's back to this posture point. What's the security posture that we want to portray to our customers? What's our strategy here? How do we want to position ourselves? Do we want to ignore it and just hope for the best? Do we want to go in the middle where we get a couple of certifications, start the journey, just lock down some basic policies and procedures and get ourselves going, and then maybe review it in a year's time? Or are we going all out? Are we really going to differentiate ourselves from the competition and look to clean up on the back of this as a differentiator? So I guess it's about setting. First question is, where do we want to be? Where do you want to be with cyber in 12 months or so, and what's the strategy to get there? But and I would, if you did nothing else, next question would be, do we have a risk assessment? Have we actually thought about, and I think Rob's already really pushed this point, have we thought about the risks that are relevant to our organization? Because if you're in a space where the risk is low, then there's no need to make it a bigger risk or a problem than it really is. So it's about, understanding how relevant is it? If we're not storing sensitive information or privacy related information, and we're not making a profit, and we're not, we're relatively small, and we're maybe we just need to have some basic protections and policies in place to manage. So I think it's about asking that, sort of having that conversation and really working through a strategy. The other thing I would also just highlight is, there's this, you mentioned it around investment, and one of the things that I exited a business early 2018, a technology business that was sold to a US acquirer, and we were shocked actually at the level of detail in the due diligence process that came at us. We were quite an early stage company still, and they employed some fairly heavyweight IP scanning technology, which most of us had never come across before. It was they invested, I think, $50K into that specific IP scanning process. But on the other side of it, they also really pushed hard on cyber and information security. And it was something that it became clear to us. I mean, we were in good place because we as I mentioned, we made that investment early on. But it was clear to us, it started to become very clear that they really use that as a chip mechanism. They wanted to expose the gaps because they know there are gaps. Yeah. And it was about a value, it was potentially about, we saw it as, well, this is something we can protect the value of this business in this exit process. So I would definitely think, if you've got an exit strategy with the business, it's not just about focusing on the now and the next 12 months, be thinking about 3-5 years ahead and what you want to achieve with the business, because you will get asked the questions at some point by either a follow-on investor or an acquirer. They will, it will come. So it is, if that's where you want to take the business, then it's something to think about now.
Understood. I think this leads us to sort of the next question quite nicely, that we talked about. You need to be thinking of the future, but also you might be quite resource constrained. You might have different people looking at this. So what can we share with the attendees in terms of the resources and support that is actually available in the market today to enhance their cybersecurity practice? And within this, I'd love to hear more about High Comply and E2E Assure to make it quite real for the attendees to understand that here's how we can use this product to become better. Maybe, Ed, I'll start with you this time to just understand about High Comply a little bit better and the general resources that you can share.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's the first thing to draw attention to is there's a lot of jargon, a lot of terminology. There's SOC, there's SOC 2, there's ISO. The nature of ISO certifications are quite complex, and we focus hard on making them easy to understand. So just through our website, we've got an ISO 27001 resource where we explain the different controls, the clauses. There's a checklist there just for you to have a look at. So even if you're not ready to engage in that process, do have a look at those resources. And there's some really good resources coming through in the wider industry from some of the government agencies that Rob's mentioned. And I think it's really about the process we've talked about in terms of getting up and running. So with us, our focus is out of the box, an organization can undertake this strategy review. What in ISO world, it's called a scoping exercise, where you scope out the business, the relevant legislation to you, any external, internal factors, the scope of your organization, where you're located, what you want to protect, what assets you have, and then introduce the policies and procedures that are relevant. So one thing to bear in mind under the ISO certification model, and I think most of the others follow the same process. You have what's called mandatory policies and procedures. In ISO world, there's almost 30 of those. So what we give the organization is a way of embedding the fundamentals, the basics, what the must-dos, but also provide sort of a guidance and help about what with additional additional policies and procedures are needed. But effectively, out of the box, you get the mandatory policies and procedures. Then you move into determining what assets. So the first step in the process is really building out your asset register, all the information assets that you have in the organization. So that's something that some organizations might already have. So again, something you can do now. You don't need to be engaged in, that's part of the posture. Let's actually just list out. We've got a website, we've got e-commerce products, we've got CRM, we've got IP, just identifying what those assets are. Because once you've identified the assets, you can do your risk assessment, and our product allows organizations to select and determine the assets they have, and then say, okay, I'm ready to start a risk assessment. And we've through talking to customers, we found out that most organizations struggle with, well, how I don't know what company laptops. Where do I start? What are the risks? What are the risks to my organization with that particular asset? So we give customers a start for 10 in terms of the likely threats and vulnerabilities and how to deal with those. So they're not starting from scratch. We effectively give a workflow that takes you through that process. So you don't need to be a cyber expert. You can do that as a business, as part of your own core team. And it's really something that then evolves into the actual. There's a process, an audit process that feeds off something that's called a statement of applicability. But it sounds complicated, but it's just a case of going through your organization and saying what's applicable to me, what's not, and then you can undertake your own audit. And I think one of the things that we've seen historically, in the past, it probably used to cost in the order of £50,000-60,000 to go through an ISO 27001 certification process. What we've been able to do is significantly reduce that cost. It typically would have taken 12 to 18 months. Yeah. We've got companies, and these are BGF portfolio companies, that have got through that process in 6 months. Wow. And the cost is maybe half or even a third of what they would have typically spent even a year or two ago. So, we're talking about, getting well under, getting into the stage of getting a certificate, maybe for something like a £15,000 investment versus that sort of 40, 50K. So there's definitely something there that, we see that as a way of, again, it's a step-by-step, there's key stages to work through, but it's very much about starting with the strategy and understanding where you want to go.
Got it. Understood. Thank you. And Rob, from an E2E Assure perspective, what resources are available to our attendees?
I think Dan's going to share with you, the audience, an SME checklist, if you like. And I point everyone to the NCSC website. We've got one of the best national cybersecurity centres in the world. It's world renowned. They pump out loads of great advice. NCSC's website. I guess our advice, we run in a complementary fashion to Ed's business. But what we're interested in is detecting and responding to cyber attacks, preventing cyber attacks, ideally. And I guess what we try and advise organisations, I think there's a good question in the chat. It's how come if you have lots of things like certifications of technology, they still get attacked? And the main problem is that they don't implement 24/7 detect and respond. Attacks go unnoticed, which is the killer thing. The most frustrating thing to witness in our view is to see organisations spend money on things, technology and certifications, and still just get hacked because the technology sends an alert and no one picked it up, no one deals with it, and there's a major cyber attack that could have been avoided. So we're much more thinking to SMEs, actually, what we're about is practically implementing things that can monitor and detect and respond to cyber attacks on your behalf 24/7 so you can sleep at night. That's our main use case, is giving your board and CEO the ability to know that he's got a dedicated, huge global team of experts connected to his systems or her systems 24/7, making sure that the risk in real time is being managed. And that's the difference in, I guess, what Edwin does and what we do. He's putting in place the ISMS and the things you need to get certificates, and we're putting in the practical bit you need to actually detect and respond to cyber attacks. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. And I think this then also, just picking up one of the questions from the attendees, is around, if there's a business that has got Cyber Essentials and ISO 27000 and still gets breached, do we see the benefit? Like, are they better off for it? Good.
Oh yes, always better off for doing these exercises, 100%. But I guess in the context of how things have moved on, it's very easy for organisations to have a gap at some point in time.
Yeah.
And if you're constantly under attack, then it only takes one small gap. And as Ed will know, when you're auditing people for ISO 20001, there's always things that need to be improved. There's always things that happen. So I guess it's the two things. You need the certification, but you also need to address how you're actually going to detect and respond to cyber attacks, because they're the things that will take you out of business.
Yeah.
That's our message. Yeah.
Understood. And one question that I had for you was around the financial investment needed, the upfront investment that a business perceives that they need to be putting in. Any advice to the CEOs or the board members on the cost implication or thinking about the cost side?
Yeah, I think really in most cases it's starting with a strategy that reduces the cyber risk, as we mentioned, but it's also build a strategy that really aims at not spending the money. I know that sounds counterintuitive to what we talked about today, but I think as Rob said, I think there's always a sort of tendency to spend money on firewalls, AI, shiny boxes, and I think introducing something, the sort of technology that Rob's got, really putting that protective layer around, and that's focused on the key risk areas of the business, relatively inexpensive to do. And the points we made about hygiene, just getting an organization tidied up and starting with those early sort of implementation tasks of setting up, creating your asset register, doing a risk assessment. So it's when you think that the average security breach is going to cost an organization £20,000-30,000 is a sort of, that's like the lower end of the scale. Spending a percentage of that on hygiene, basic processes and systems feels like a good investment. But it's and it's also a case of worth looking at insurance. And I think as Rob's mentioned, it's getting more difficult to get insurance. But I took out a quote just last night to see what the market's doing at the moment. Yeah. 20-person tech business turning over a couple of £1 million will be paying about £1,000 a year for 100,000 worth of cyber cover. Mm-hmm. It's not a lot of cover, but for £1,000 a year, you've got a basic level of protection for a small business. Yeah. So I would say it's worth looking at insurance, and I think because getting into that market, getting into it and acquiring it and showing that you've got no claims, it's a bit like a car insurance policy. Getting in early is good. But I think it's start with hygiene, start with the policies and procedures side of things, and certification isn't as I mentioned, the certification process isn't as expensive as it once was, and I think this is something that I think we push quite hard. So it's really about building that. So I guess where I'm coming from, and Rob might chip in here in terms of the cost of the sort of technology he's providing, but for a 10-15K investment, you can do a lot. You can get well under the way of doing a lot of the basic things you need to do. Got
it. One question before we go that I have is imagine you're a CEO, you woke up in the morning and suddenly there's been a cyber attack overnight. What do you do? How do you, maybe Rob, what is your recommendation to that CEO about start your day?
But I'd say sort of wind it back a bit and be prepared for that before it happens. So have a trusted advisor, someone who you're going to go to. And it's not probably your IT team, is what I'm trying to say. You need lawyers for legal stuff. You need cyber people for cyber stuff. Yeah. Some of that stuff you know about yourself because you know about business, you know a bit about law, but you need a specialist. I'd say make sure you have that relationship to begin with and you know who to call. That's the kind of key thing. Being prepared is the key thing, and you can do a tabletop exercise tomorrow that simply says, okay, what would we do, who would we call, what would we need to do next, and that would lead into a slightly wider exercise which would set you in the right path for thinking about cybersecurity. What if we couldn't log on in the morning? If no one could log on, we just can't log in, what could that be, a cyber attack? You start by thinking about that, but don't try and fix it all yourself, because you're a business doing whatever you're doing. Don't try and solve it all yourself, because it's too complicated and takes too long. Yeah. Understand the risk, go on the risk, but don't understand the implementation of addressing that risk. find someone to work with. I guess that's the key thing.
Okay.
And the final message I wanted to put out there is take it seriously, but don't be afraid. This is something that you can manage. This isn't something that you just can't deal with because it's too complex and too difficult. It's not like that. And the best strategies that CEOs can implement is, as we've been discussing, creating IT strategies that make you more secure, that reduce your exposure to cyber attack, and then adding services like ours to that is very, very cost effective. If you're trying to align your vision for your cyber and all that with your IT, your cloud first or whatever it is, you can really reduce over time the spend per head on cybersecurity. I think that's a positive message, and then you can turn that into a key business enabler. It'll be a big competitive advantage for you.
Oh, thanks, Rob. And Ed, maybe finishing off the conversation with you, what would be your call to action to the CEOs and board members who are attending today?
Yeah, I think just really three things. Whatever you do, start small, start today. Working towards is better than not started. Focus on your people. Build the framework around your people, and understand your assets. Understanding your people. And look, get certified. I mean, I would say that because that's our business. But look, even if it's just to keep your customers happy, the certification process will pay for itself over time.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Ed. I feel like I've learned a lot more, and it gives me hope that actually not all is lost. But we do want to thank you for taking out the time, and also to all the attendees for listening today. And please, attendees, if you want to reach out to either Ed or Rob to speak further, just get in touch with us and we're happy to make the connection. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.